Hey guys, it's Bunny from BunnyCakes.com, and this is my first author interview. I'm so excited to be able to bring this video to you guys. Whenever I started my channel or started thinking about doing my channel, one of the things I wanted to do was actually connect with authors. I wanted to be able to bring authors closer to you guys, because when I watch booktube videos, I get a lot of book hauls and I get all of that, but I feel like I don't know. There's just so much more that could be going on in our community. So yeah, I don't know. So when the opportunity presented itself and one of BookTube's own was releasing a book, I thought, what a great opportunity. I mean, this is somebody that's from our community that has a book coming out. So I contacted Danny and I asked him if he would be willing to do an author interview for me, and he said yes. So this is the first official author interview on my channel. If you guys like it, please thumb it up, leave me comments down below, and let me know that this is something that you too are interested in seeing. Because if you guys want to see this kind of stuff, I will start hounding people to send me author interviews, because I just think it's awesome. So this is our first author interview. So I'd like to welcome Danny Marks to my channel. For those of you that don't know, Velveteen actually releases today. Velveteen is a thriller, urban fantasy. It's got a little romance in it. It falls into every genre. I think most people are lumping it into horror. It has action. You know, there's a serial killer and there's purgatory, and there is so much stuff. I was lucky enough to read this book earlier this year. My review for it is already up on Goodreads and on my site, and I'll put the link for you for that down below. Let's meet the author. I'd like to welcome accomplished author and YouTube personality Danny Marks to my channel. Hi Danny, thanks for agreeing to do this interview. That's fun stuff, right?
Of course, it's fun. Yeah. I mean, any time that I get to talk to someone who's not my dog is pretty fun, I have to say. Definitely fun.
So I think the one thing everybody really wants to know is, how did the idea of Velveteen even come to you?
The idea actually came in two big chunks. The first chunk was I had this idea about this little girl whose grandfather was a detective, and she was like super into his work and wanted to be a detective too and read mysteries and things like that. And then one summer, this was based on an incident that happened in my childhood where our garbage man was actually killing kids in the neighborhood. This was for real. And what happened is that a body started showing up at the elementary school that I went to, and it was all cordoned off. We weren't allowed to go there. This was during the summer though, so it was not, it didn't like preclude school or anything. So the idea for this, this story that this kid got involved in with a serial killer came from that piece of my childhood. I wanted to take this child through her curiosity and getting into trouble that she couldn't get out of, and ending up with her dying. At that point, it was called The Trouble with the Living, and it was a middle grade novel, and I had my goddaughter read it, and she came back and said, middle grade is not for you. You're going to have to up this. But I put it aside. I just absolutely, I printed it off, I stuck it in a drawer, it was done. And I moved on and wrote really adult stuff. So, okay, so there's that piece. The second piece is that when I sold my adult series, I went to New York to visit my editor and my agent, and that was really fun. But I also, because I'm an art history minor all through my undergraduate work, I was really interested in hitting the museums. And at MoMA, they were having, Museum of Modern Art, they were having an exhibit of all of George Seurat's charcoals, or I think they're called Comte Crayon. And Comte Crayon, something like that. This is French, right? Now, George Seurat is a pointillist. This was right around the time where Impressionists were coming around. And he did a series of paintings called La Grande Jatte, which is a park in Paris, and people are like looking at it. You've seen this picture before. You've seen the painting. It was unusual for me to see all of his portraits and things that he did in charcoals, which turned out to be looking really kind of grim and grayscale and very dark and gloomy, and something kind of struck me about them that made me think of purgatory as being this really sort of gray, ashen place. And so it really has, the story kind of gelled from there. It's like I stuck that in with The Trouble with the Living. I knew that Louisa needed to stay her age because I loved her character, and so I needed a new character, and so Velveteen was born more out of my kind of personality, sort of the dark, snarky stuff that is me, and a character that I had written in my adult series who needed to be not so unlikable. There are a lot of people who are going to say that Velveteen is an unlikable character, but believe me, she's one of the most likable characters I've ever written. Because I have a tendency to write characters that are very raw and very real and who don't give a crap whether people like them. And that's kind of how, yeah, that's how it is. That's the people I like in my life. And so Velveteen is in my life. So there you go.
I love the characters. Velveteen was kind of a badass, and can we talk about the twins for a minute? I loved the twins. So I've heard that most authors in their character development actually draw from people that they know. So who did you use for your character development?
Yeah, they say that writers should write what they know, and I really believe that that means something else, something other than what people think it means. Write what you know means you develop this individual set of experiences, and you have reactions to those experiences and emotions around them and ways of dealing with them. And those are the pieces that you bring to your work. So when I do characterization, it is based on certain reactions I have. So I put myself in the position of that character, and what makes it individually mine, what makes it my voice, that character, is that I have access to those emotions. I allow myself to be vulnerable, and I move through that process, and that sounds really vague and arty, and yeah. They're not specific people. I do like an amalgam of like a whole bunch of people that I like their character traits, but for the most part, the amalgam happens by me sort of absorbing people. I was a therapist for 12 years and spoke to a lot of people. The relationships that you develop between a therapist and a client is very intimate, and those moments are very, like, you begin to pick up each other's language. Yeah, and so then when I go to write, the characters just sort of kind of fall into place, if that makes any sense at all. You know what, I do agree. I think Velvet is a really badass heroine. I don't think I can write a heroine that's not pretty badass. I actually prefer strong women in most of the big roles that I've written, and in every book that I've written, actually, there's been a very strong woman present and a strong female presence. And that's because I'm an only child. My father was a workaholic. He was gone a lot of the time. And so I spent a lot of time with my mother and her friends and sort of understanding sort of adult conversation really early on in life. And so, yeah, that's why.
So I know you've had some success as an adult author. I'm just curious, what made you decide to try out the YA genre?
I wouldn't call it success exactly, since it was a miserable sales failure, so I wouldn't say successful. It was successful in that it was a process I needed to go through in order to get where I am today. And yeah, I think that everything that you do, you learn from and you move on from. And I'm really grateful that the publishing house that bought that series bought it and got it out there. And yeah, and I learned a lot of stuff from it in terms of what an audience can take. I think a lot of people are going to say that Velveteen really pushes some buttons and pushes the envelope quite a bit, but my adult series was way beyond that. It was like it pushed every button. It pushed 12 buttons on every page. The decision to move to YA was, I kind of answered that in the first question, which was that the idea was already percolating before I even moved into my adult series. And so when the option book on that series wasn't picked up, I was kind of scrambling, and I was like, well, I had this idea, Jim. I was talking to my agent, and he was like, go for it. It's just go for it. If you've got that in you, do it. And I mean, he's very supportive. And so I did. And yeah, and he was able to sell it. Over the course of that time, some things happened that made it much more able to happen. And that is that Jim went from a primarily adult roster of authors to a lot of YA. So he had quite a few sort of pots on the fire in terms of YA editors. So by the time I finished my book and we did some editing runs on it, it took a while. He was able to sell it, and thank God, because that's great. I love continuing to be an author.
There are a few YA, books classified as horror, but not a lot. And the ones that are, I don't really, they're more thriller than horror. Do you see more horror books coming to YA? Or, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's something that they'll actually follow through on, or?
I agree. And Velveteen is listed as horror, but I think it's also listed as a number of other things too when you look at Amazon. Even dystopian, which, maybe. They're all very loosely fitting. I've never really fit into any genre specifically. I kind of blend a lot of things together. There are definitely horrific elements in Velveteen. There are these moments that you slip into. I think that there's an interesting juxtaposition where if you, as a reader, are in a calm space and feel like you're comfortable, and then a writer pushes a horror scene into the mix, I think it can have a very unusual effect on your psyche. And I love that juxtaposition. I love it. And I think some people who read horror are kind of purists. So they like it to be a very specific way. They want it to read through in a way that builds tension and hits sort of levels of horror along the way and reaches a climax that is just super scary. And has a creep factor all the way through it. I agree. I love reading horror like that too. In fact, the next book that I'm writing right now is a pretty standard horror novel. I won't say standard because I don't think I do anything that's derivative per se. I like to do things that are not seen before. The other piece is, and you're going to love this, Bunny, is that the new thing, and when I say the new thing in YA, believe me, it's already been done. But the new thing that you're going to start seeing on the shelves a lot of is YA horror. There's a lot of acquisitions going on in YA horror.
So it's no secret that, during the editing process, sometimes the publishers can completely change a story from the author's first vision of it. Is there anything that you wish that you could go back and put back into Velveteen, or anything that you would change about Velveteen that they made you change that you wish you wouldn't have?
Yeah, editing is crazy. I mean, you think you do a lot of work ahead of time, and then your editor goes through and writes up this big letter that says, "I love it, except for these things." And sometimes there are a lot of things. This for Velveteen went through a massive revision before it was really accepted. That took several months, and what it was I had alternated perspectives. Nick had a much larger role in the original, the manuscript that we sold to Random House. The perspective switched back and forth by chapter. So you saw Nick get killed in New York. You saw all these things happen to him. He had specific things that happened aside from Velvet that you're just not conscious of now. And that had to go because it really was Velvet's story. And to me, Velvet's story was much more about coming to terms with her death, more than anything.
I was lucky enough to get to read Velveteen already. I loved it. I know the public is going to love it. What's next for you? What do you have coming up?
Thank you. Thanks. I'm glad you liked it. You never know how people are going to react to your work, and I just hope that people just really dig it. Because I think, I mean, I put a lot of work into it. I wanted to make sure that it was unusual, that it had this, I think the romance was the toughest part for me, because I wanted to create this romance that was not based on love, which is I think the trickiest part, because I think it's easy to look at what Velvet and Nick have and go, oh, they love each other. I think they say things, but to me, it's totally not love. It's not. I don't believe that they sort of understand each other fully until the very end of the book. Oh, what I'm working on now, it's called The Stains. It's in a sort of an outline form at this point. We're going back and forth with my editor, trying to figure out exactly what the shape of this book is going to be. And It is very horror. It's sort of a throwback horror, not to the 80s, but to the 70s, which is when I really kind of fell in love with Giallo, and that's the Italian horror films that were just like so bizarre and unusual and really very frightening. One of my favorite movies of all time is Suspiria, which is about a witches coven at a dance school, like in Austria or somewhere. I have no idea where it actually takes place, but it is bizarre. It's bizarre stuff. And I wanted to do something very similar to that, and something that people had not ever seen before. And so that's what we're working on. I hope people are gonna love it when it comes out, and if it comes out. Cross your fingers, because you never know. You never know how this is gonna go. I could be working on a different outline for a different book next week. I don't know. You don't know.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview for me. I know how busy you are. I loved Velveteen. I will not be surprised one bit to see it on some of the bestseller lists. In my opinion, it really is on my list of things you should read in 2012. Like, it is that good. And
yeah, oh, you know what? I really hope people buy it. That would be awesome if they would buy it. I think that a lot of people are gonna like it. And as for bestseller, where's the wood? From your mouth to God's ears. Is that the saying? I think that's the saying. You know, a bestseller actually does wonders for an author's career. It actually keeps them going. I imagine that it could really help me financially too, not necessarily from royalties, but being able to sell more books. So if people love Velveteen, spread the word for sure, and hopefully it'll all come down to that first week from Tuesday to Monday, from the 9th through the 15th, I think. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, yeah, it'll really come down to the numbers on that week, how it's gonna play out. We'll see. But thank you so much for your support and encouragement, because that's great. I'm really happy that people love it, and I mean, I think that there's been an overwhelmingly positive response. I'm not sure what to do with it. It's not something I've experienced before. The adult books did not give me that experience. So anyway, that's it. Thanks. Thank you for interviewing me and having me here. And everyone, pick up Velveteen. Would be awesome. See ya.
so Velveteen is being released October the 9th. It's being put out by Delacorte Press. You can get it wherever books are sold. I'll put some links down below. Danny actually has a deal with his local bookstore. If you order it from them, you can leave some comments in the thing, and he'll actually sign it and personalize it for you. So that's great. I'll also put some other links down below. If you haven't picked it up yet, I say pick it up. It was a great read. And if for those of you that want to do the book club thing, this is actually our book club pick for this month. So you have until November 3rd to pick up the book and to read it. Join us on November the 3rd when we have our live book club chat when we discuss Velveteen by Daniel Marks. Thanks for watching, you guys. See ya. Oh my God, I loved Elmo.
It's Grover. It's Grover.